Was für ein schöner Auftakt. Dear Mr. President, dear Stefan Löfven, sehr geehrter Herr Stadtpräsident Schumann, sehr geehrter Herr Bürgermeister Lindenau, verehrte Repräsentantinnen und Repräsentanten aus Politik, Wirtschaft, Wissenschaft und Kultur. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde unserer Stiftung und des Willy-Brandt-Hauses Lübeck. Es koppelt ein bisschen zurück. In meiner Eigenschaft als Vorstandsvorsitzender der Bundeskanzler-Willy-Brandt-Stiftung heiße ich Sie auch im Namen unseres Kuratoriums sehr herzlich zur Willy-Brandt-Rede Lübeck 2024 willkommen. I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to our guest of honor, this evening's speaker, Stefan Löfven, the President of the Party of European Socialists and former Prime Minister of Sweden. We are extremely honored that you have accepted our invitation to deliver this year's Willy Brandt speech in Lübeck. Welcome, dear Mr. President, to Lübeck, the city. Lübeck, the city where Willy Brandt was born, and with a view of tonight's beautiful venue, welcome to the Joanneum, the school where Willy Brandt graduated from high school in 1932. Please allow me now to continue in German. Erlauben Sie mir bitte auf Deutsch fortzufahren. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, wir müssen heute Abend, denke ich, vor allem auch über Multilateralismus sprechen. Über Multilateralismus als globale politische Praxis, die Frieden und Freiheit verpflichtet ist. Man muss kein Pessimist sein, um die Welt in der Krise zu sehen. Wir alle wissen um die dreifache planetarische Krise des Klimawandels, der Umweltverschmutzung und des Biodiversitätsverlusts. Länder in allen Weltregionen sind davon betroffen. Ebenso wenig muss ich Ihnen, meine Damen und Herren, die dramatische Zuspitzung der internationalen Lage erläutern. Wir sind alle Zeitzeugen davon. Wir können in Echtzeit dabei zusehen, wie bestehende sicherheitspolitische Problemlagen weltweit eskalieren. Und das gilt nicht erst seit dem Krieg in der Ukraine, der in sein 3. Jahr geht. Es gilt genauso für andere gewaltsame Konflikte und Kriege in aller Welt. Wir alle wissen darum, wie wir auch von dem millionenfachen menschlichen Leid wissen, das durch diese Krisen und Kriege hervorgerufen wird. Angesichts dieser umfassenden Problemlagen wird in der Politikwissenschaft neuerdings wieder häufig von Polykrisen gesprochen. Als Polykrisen werden multiple Krisen bezeichnet, die sich gegenseitig verstärken. Die einzelnen Krisen existieren also nicht nebeneinander, nein, sie beeinflussen sich gegenseitig. Aber es kommt noch ein weiterer Faktor hinzu, der uns ebenfalls allen bekannt ist. Keine dieser Krisen macht an politischen Grenzen Halt. Alle diese Krisen sind auch nicht national zu lösen, sondern nur durch gemeinsame Anstrengungen. Und das liegt, denke ich, auch in unser aller gemeinsamen Interesse. Oder vielleicht sollte ich sogar sagen, das sollte in unserem gemeinsamen Interesse liegen. Denn das ist doch die Situation, in der wir uns befinden. Global konfrontiert mit sich gegenseitig verstärkenden Krisen werden multilaterale Politikansätze, ob es nun um das Klima oder um Sicherheit geht, schlecht geredet, ja gelegentlich klein gemacht, als naiv verlacht. Und ich denke hier nicht nur an den designierten Präsidenten der Vereinigten Staaten. Auch in der deutschen Debatte hörte man schon vor dem 24. Februar 2022 und damit vor der Ausweitung des russischen Krieges in der Ukraine dass die Zeit des geordneten Multilateralismus in Europa und der Welt beendet sei. Und selbst vor der UNO, also der supranationalen Institution, die wie keine andere für diese Politik steht oder stehen müsste, war schon von Multilateralismus auf dem Sterbebett die Rede. Stefan Löfven, unser heutiger Ehrengast, und so viel darf ich seine Rede sicherlich vorwegnehmen, sieht das anders, ganz anders. Er ist ein Vertreter und Verfechter des Multilateralismus. Dabei verschließt er nicht die Augen vor den Schwächen multilateraler Politik und Praxis, die in unserem Zeitalter neue Nationalismen und unter veränderten geopolitischen Rahmenbedingungen zunehmend unter Druck geraten. Aber für ihn kann das nur bedeuten, dass der Multilateralismus reformiert werden muss, dass er nachhaltiger und solidarischer gestaltet werden muss. Oder in einem Wort ausgedrückt, dass er effektiver und damit auch wirksamer werden muss. Und genau dafür, meine Damen und Herren, setzt sich Stefan Löfven ein. 2022 wurde er vom UN-Generalsekretär Antonio Guterres zum Chorvorsitzenden des High-Level Advisory Boards on Effective Multilateralism berufen. Die Handlungsempfehlungen der Kommission liegen inzwischen vor. Mehr noch, sie sind in den Pakt für die Zukunft eingeflossen, der die UN fit für das 21. Jahrhundert machen soll und der im September dieses Jahres auf dem UN-Zukunftsgipfel in New York verabschiedet wurde. Verfasst wurden diese Handlungsempfehlungen von Stefan Löfven und seinen Co-Autoren in der Überzeugung, dass, ich zitiere, unsere kollektiven Herausforderungen nicht im Alleingang zu bewältigen sind. Eine engere Zusammenarbeit ist der einzige Weg zu einem gegenseitig garantierten Überleben. Vielleicht geht es Ihnen dabei wie mir, meine Damen und Herren. Bei dieser Formulierung kommt mir sofort der erste Bericht der von Willy Brandt geleiteten unabhängigen Kommission für internationale Entwicklungsfragen in den Sinn. Besser bekannt als Brandt-Report heißt dieser Bericht, den er 1980 an die UN übergeben hat, das Überleben sichern, gemeinsame Interessen der Industrie- und Entwicklungsländer. Auch wenn heute nicht mehr von Entwicklungsländern gesprochen wird, sondern vom globalen Süden, so ist Brandts politische und eminent multilaterale Forderung doch klar und deutlich. Um unser aller Überleben zu sichern, muss die Zukunft im Interesse aller und im Interesse der Weltinnenpolitik sicherer und gerechter gestaltet werden. Die Zukunft ist heute und der Multilateralismus hat in ihr einen schweren Stand. Das zeigt sich auch in der Sicherheitspolitik. Politische Vorstellungen gemeinsamer Sicherheit, wie sie von Willy Brandt und damals auch dem schwedischen Ministerpräsidenten Olof Palme und anderen in der Zeit des Kalten Krieges entwickelt wurden, haben dramatisch an Überzeugungskraft verloren. Stattdessen befindet sich die Welt zurzeit in einer Zeitrechnung, in der militärische Sicherheit wieder absolute Priorität hat oder haben soll, was angesichts der internationalen Krisen sicher auf der einen Seite nicht verwundern kann. Aber wenn Sicherheit wie jetzt wieder vorwiegend nur militärisch gedacht wird, als Nullsummenspiel der Abschreckung mit unkontrollierter Aufrüstung, dann entsteht nicht mehr Sicherheit, sondern weniger. Und deshalb befinden wir uns gegenwärtig in einer Spirale zunehmender Instabilität, die bestehende Problemlagen und Krisen nicht entspannt, sondern anheizt, wie es Forscher des renommierten Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, kurz SIPRI, dieser Tage formuliert haben. Das Stockholmer Forschungsinstitut, meine Damen und Herren, veröffentlicht alljährlich Originaldaten und Analysen über den jeweils aktuellen Stand militärischer und damit auch atomarer Bewaffnung, Abrüstung und internationaler Sicherheit weltweit. Und Stefan Löfven, unser heutiger Ehrengast, ist Verwaltungsratsvorsitzender dieser angesehenen wie wichtigen Forschungseinrichtung. Er war langjähriger Ministerpräsident Schwedens und Parteivorsitzender der schwedischen Sozialdemokratie. Als Regierungschef von 2014 bis 2021 hatte Stefan Löfven schon früh durchgesetzt, Schwedens Militärausgaben bis 2025 um mehr als 80% zu erhöhen. Gleichzeitig aber machte er deutlich, dass ständig steigende Rüstungsausgaben aus seiner Sicht nicht zu einer nachhaltigen Sicherheit beitragen. Ein Beitritt Schwedens zur NATO kam deshalb damals für ihn nicht in Frage. Im März dieses Jahres ist Schweden schließlich aber doch vor dem Hintergrund der veränderten Sicherheitslage in Europa der NATO beigetreten. Ein Schritt, der auch von Stefan Löfven begrüßt wurde. Ein Schritt, der sich zumal nach 200 Jahren Bündnisfreiheit als schwedisches Bekenntnis zu multilateralen Bündnissen verstehen lässt. Aber in unkontrolliertem Auf- oder Westrüsten, das womöglich, und auch das zeichnet sich aktuell ab, in neue militärische Blockbildung endet, geht dieses Bekenntnis für Stefan Löfven nicht auf. Er setzt sich unermüdlich für eine nachhaltige Sicherheit ein. Und nachhaltige Sicherheit, das heißt gemeinsame Sicherheit, die sich nicht mit Kriegstüchtigkeit und neuester Kriegstechnik begnügt, sondern immer auch Entspannung und Frieden mitdenkt. Oder anders gesagt, Stefan Löfven ist ein Vertreter und Verfechter multilateralen Denkens und Handelns. Er steht und er wirbt ganz im Sinne Brandts und Palmes für Multilateralismus als Gegenentwurf zu einem Denken, das die internationale Politik allzu lange bestimmt hat und heute wieder um sich greift, ein Denken nach Maßgabe des Nullsummenspiels, dass man nur gewinnt, wenn der andere verliert. Dagegen setzt der Multilateralismus einen Kontrapunkt. Entweder man gewinnt zusammen oder man verliert gemeinsam. Lieber Stefan Löfven, wir freuen uns also sehr auf Ihre heutige Willy Brandt-Rede in Lübeck. In other words, Stefan Löfven is a representative and advocate of multilateral thinking and action. In the spirit of Brandt and Palme, he stands for a promoted multilateralism as an alternative to a way of thinking that has dominated international politics for too long and is once again gaining ground today. A way of thinking based on the zero-sum game that you only game what the other loses. Multilateralism is a counterpoint to this. Either you win together or you lose together. Dear Stefan Löfven, we are very much looking forward to your Willy Brandt speech today in Lübeck. Ich denke, ich kann dies auch im Namen der Hansestadt Lübeck sagen, der wir für die bewährte Partnerschaft bei dieser Veranstaltungsreihe sehr danken. Es ist dies, und das sage ich nochmals mit Freude und Dankbarkeit, die 14. Willy Brandt-Rede Lübeck, zu der wir gemeinsam einladen. Ihnen, sehr geehrter Herr Stadtpräsident Schumann und sehr geehrter Herr Bürgermeister Lindenau, danken wir ganz besonders für Ihre andauernde Unterstützung der Arbeit des Willy Brandt-Hauses und damit dem Lübecker Standort unserer Bundesstiftung. Ebenfalls danken möchten wir unserem heutigen Gastgeber, dem Joanneum zu Lübeck, an dem Willy Brandt, damals noch als Herbert Frahm, 1932 sein Abitur abgelegt hat. Und deshalb freuen wir uns auch sehr, dass die Big Band des Joanneums unter ihrem Leiter Hartmut Jung auch in diesem Jahr wieder die musikalische Umrahmung übernimmt. Herzlichen großen Dank dafür. Meine Damen und Herren, liebes Lübecker Publikum, bevor ich Bürgermeister Lindenau für ein Grußwort auf die Bühne bitte, möchte ich auch Ihnen allen danken dafür, dass Sie aus Anlass der Willy-Brandt-Rede wieder so zahlreich erschienen sind. Ihr Interesse an unserer Arbeit ist uns Ansporn und Verpflichtung zugleich. Vielen Dank.
So trocken soll das Grußwort nicht werden. Vielen Dank. Dear Mr. Stefan Löfven, sehr geehrter Herr Professor Dr. Schöler, lieber Herr Stadtpräsident, sehr geehrter Herr Bundestagsabgeordneter, lieber Tim Klüsendorf, verehrte Gäste, ich will den Ball gerne aufnehmen, denn die gute Tradition, die gemeinsam zwischen Bundeskanzler Willy Brandt Stiftung und Hansestadt Lübeck in dieser Form in Lübeck schon seit Jahren besteht, ist, glaube ich, etwas, auf dem man sagen kann, dass wir ein gutes Fundament haben, wenn es darum geht, den demokratischen Diskurs in der Stadt zu gestalten. Und da, glaube ich, trägt die Bundeskanzler Willy Brandt Stiftung eine Menge zu bei und deswegen kooperieren wir gerne als Stadt auch regelmäßig mit der Stiftung. Die Willy Brandt-Rede ist sicher auch im Programm der Bundeskanzler Willy Brandt Stiftung eine der bedeutendsten Veranstaltungen des Jahres, wenngleich das Angebot des Hauses in seiner Vielfalt und Angebotsbreite für alle Generationen eine wirkliche Bereicherung für die demokratische Willensbildung und den dafür notwendigen Dialog ist. Und den regt eben das Willy-Brandt-Haus immer wieder auch in unserer Stadt an und dafür bin ich sehr dankbar. Herzlichen Dank deshalb auch an das gesamte Team des Bundeskanzler Willy Brandt Hauses und an die Leiterin Dr. Bettina Greiner, denn man erlebt immer wieder, wenn man ins Haus kommt, und ich glaube, so geht es Ihnen auch, es ist immer ein herzliches Willkommen und es gibt immer wieder einen neuen, guten Eindruck, den man im Hause bekommen kann und auch einen neuen Denkanstoß für die ein oder andere Diskussion, die man lokal, regional oder auch international versucht zu bewegen. Und deshalb freut es mich auch, dass es gelungen ist, dass wir den Weg dahin beschreiten, dass sich das Haus erweitern soll. Erweitern soll in weitere Flächen. Die Gremien der Hansestadt Lübeck haben in dieser Woche auch den dafür notwendigen Schritt noch einmal abgesegnet, dass die Abteilung Denkmalpflege, die noch im Haus ist, umziehen kann in andere Räumlichkeiten, sodass die Möglichkeit besteht, dass sich das Haus, das Willy-Brandt-Haus, auch am Standort Königstraße weiterhin erweitern kann. Und wir sind optimistisch, dass wir einen guten Weg finden, das auch hinzubekommen. Heute nun dürfen wir abermals eine bedeutende Willy-Brandt-Rede erleben und ich heiße auch im Namen der Hansestadt Lübeck und des Stadtpräsidenten Stefan Löfven herzlich in der Hansestadt Lübeck willkommen. Dear Stefan Löfven, it's a special honor for us to welcome you here in the Hanseatic city of Lübeck. We are looking forward to your comments on the current situation in Europe, on war and peace. So it's a great honor for us to welcome here in Lübeck. In der heutigen Zeit steht Europa vor komplexen und tiefgreifenden Herausforderungen, die unsere gemeinsamen Werte und den Frieden auf dem Kontinent auf die Probe stellen. Der russische Angriffskrieg gegen die Ukraine hat uns in den vergangenen über 2 Jahren eindringlich gezeigt, wie zerbrechlich Frieden und Stabilität auch in Europa sein kann, wenngleich wir über Jahrzehnte geglaubt haben, das wäre nicht so. Es ist ein Angriff, der nicht nur die Ukraine, sondern das gesamte europäische Sicherheits- und Wertesystem erschüttert hat. Die Folgen sind weitreichend und wirken sich auf allen Ebenen aus. Wirtschaftlich, politisch, aber auch sozial. Doch inmitten dieser Kriegslage stellt sich uns die zentrale Frage, wohin steuert Europa und wie können wir den Frieden zurückerlangen? Ich bin sicher, dazu wird uns unser heutiger Redner einige Impulse liefern können. Neben kurzfristiger militärischer Antworten der Abschreckung braucht es aber auch den Dialog. Spätestens nach der Dauer des jetzigen Krieges in der Ukraine, glaube ich, stellen wir alle fest, dass reine militärische Antwort nicht die Lösung dieser Situation sein kann. Ein entscheidender Weg zurück zum Frieden liegt aus meiner Sicht jedoch auch in der Stärke und Unterstützung der europäischen Zivilgesellschaft. Europa ist nicht nur ein Kontinent, sondern auch eine Wertegemeinschaft. Die europäischen Grundwerte wie Demokratie, Menschenrechte, Rechtsstaatlichkeit sind und bleiben das Fundament von Frieden. Und wenn diese Grundwerte auch in dem Inneren der Europäischen Union destabilisiert werden, müssen wir konsequent handeln und Populisten sehr deutlich die Schranken aufzeigen und nicht nur Leitplanken verschieben. Willy Brandt hat 1971 den Friedensnobelpreis für seine Bemühungen um die Aussöhnung zwischen Ost- und Westdeutschland erhalten. Damals nicht wirklich gefeiert für diese Leistung. Wenn wir ehrlich sind, ist erst mit der Wiedervereinigung so richtig deutlich geworden, welche Leistung Willy Brandt hier vollbracht hat, und die Würdigung setzte auch dann erst wirklich ein. Vielleicht ist das auch ein Grund dafür, dass wir darüber nachdenken müssen, dass wir vielleicht ab und zu genauer darüber nachdenken müssen, welche Wege wir gehen, wenn es darum geht, Frieden in Europa wiederherzustellen. Dass eben nicht nur die militärische Antwort eine Antwort sein kann, sondern dass wir eben auch an dieser Stelle neue Wege gehen müssen. Ich hoffe sehr, dass wir dafür auch heute neue Anregungen kriegen von unserem Redner Stefan Löfven. Und nachdem wir jetzt noch einmal schwungvolle Musik hören, geht es dann auch wirklich in die Tiefe. Vielen Dank.
Dear friends, thank you so much for this generous invitation. Thank you for a brilliant day today, meeting students, seeing the Willy Brandt House, and walking around in Lübeck and being informed about important history. Thank you so much for this. It is truly an honor to deliver this year's Willy Brandt speech here in Lübeck, a place, of course, deeply connected to Brandt's legacy. For me, Willy Brandt has always been more than a historical figure. His commitment to humanity, to peace and justice shaped the way I approach public service and social democracy. Together with Olof Palme, Bruno Kreisky, Mario Soares, and a bit later also Felipe González, Willy Brandt inspired me to join the social democratic movement, and he also made me proud to be a part of it. His North-South, a program for survival report, moved me and awakened in me a spirit of internationalism and solidarity. And that is a spirit and a feeling that I still carry with me. Like so many others, I am inspired by the dignified, compassionate way he navigated through some of the most difficult periods of the 20th century. So in Brandt, we see a rare individual. And to find such a principled personality in politics is extremely rare. Such honors belong only to those who are able to place a higher ideal above all else, including their own self-interest. They belong to those who have the courage to stand up for what is right for all, especially at crucial times. Much has been said about a man who was mayor of West Berlin, federal foreign minister and vice chancellor, and also chancellor of Germany. A man who lived in exile during the Second World War, first in Norway, then in my own country, Sweden, where he remained until the end of the war. A man who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1971 for his relentless drive to heal the divide between East and West Germany, but also for championing détente with the East, laying the foundation for lasting peace in Europe. But such is the richness of thought of a man like Willy Brandt that we can all meet here in Lübeck, his birthplace, and let him inspire us every year. Brandt's ideas were novel, you can say even revolutionary. His concept of a Weltinnenpolitik, of one world, was initially far from mainstream. The idea that the global and domestic politics are deeply intertwined and that our fates are linked across borders was not universally accepted from the outset. But he courageously asserted that the world changes could not be solved in isolationism, but through finding common solutions to common challenges. He laid the foundation for this revolutionary new idea already in his famous North-South report in 1980. Olof Palme, who had also worked on this report, used this approach a little later in his own report, Common Security, as did Gro Harlem Brundtland in her report, Our Common Future. Later in 1990, after the fall of the wall, it was again Willy Brandt himself who brought the vision of global governance into play. He initiated the Commission on Global Governance, co-chaired by the former Swedish Prime Minister Ingvar Carlsson, who then produced the landmark report, Our Global Neighborhood. So, the story of Willy Brandt's idea of a common world is a prime example of how ideas can grow over time and gradually leave their mark. Over time, his vision of international cooperation and development became the foundation for much of the subsequent international order. But unfortunately, it is also true that today we are at a crossroads. As evidenced by the recent US presidential election and Trump's return to the White House, regressive movements exploit human discontent, capitalize on public perceptions, profit from citizens' hardship, and convey false and twisted messages. Consequently, the world seems to be turning inward once again. Multilateralism, once the beating heart of our collective approach to global challenges, is increasingly being sidelined, and the idea of global governance is once again being questioned, sometimes aggressively. However, this should and may not be a reason for resignation or even fatalism. On the contrary, that's why Brandt's ideas are more necessary today than ever before. Willy Brandt had also to fight for his ideas in his time, and that is precisely what we have to do today. We too are confronted with crises that test our collective resolve in times of ongoing conflicts and multiple existential crises. We too must do everything in our power to resist the return to the zero-sum game of international relations and to the politics of hard power. We must embrace the logic of win-win solution, which is at the heart of multilateralism. In this context, I would like to recall Willy Brandt's Nobel lecture speech titled Peace Policy in Our Time, delivered on the 11th of December, 1971. He begins his speech with three pre-conclusions that are incredibly relevant also today. First, that no national interest can today be isolated from collective responsibility for peace. Second, that war must not be a means to achieve political ends. And third, that wars must be eliminated, not merely limited. So in short, three important calls: a call to greater international cooperation, a call to reject hard power politics, and a call to actively engage in peacemaking in the broadest sense. Now we need a renewed commitment to the values of Willy Brandt, values of peace, of cooperation, of shared responsibility. We need to bring these values back into the mainstream to overcome nationalism and isolationism. And that is why, dear friends, my key message today is to argue that Brandt's approach to international relations is perfectly suited to the great challenges of our time. And it is perfectly suited to addressing what I believe to be the three most pressing crises right now: the multilateralism crisis, the democratic crisis, and the climate crisis. These are all challenges that no nation, no matter how powerful or self-sufficient, can address alone. And it is for this reason, and because of their crucial implications for our future, that these three topics will shape my speech here today. Each of these challenges are daunting, but I am convinced that together, step by step, inspired by the example of Willy Brandt, we will overcome them, starting with the crisis of multilateralism. For us, peace and security are not just lofty ideals. They are at the very heart of the Charter of the United Nations, principles that we must defend with all our might. And regarding the United Nations, I think of Eleanor Roosevelt, a visionary who warned us that tomorrow is now, that the world of the future is in our hands. She believed in peace, and as she put it so poignantly, one must work at it. She, along with thinkers like Willy Brandt, understood that humanity's challenges have always reached far beyond any single nation's borders. And this urgent call for collective action was as critical then as it is now. Because no one is safe from the potential impact of the climate crisis, the rise of international populism, or the potential for armed conflict. And on this last point, Europe knows very well the dark lessons of war. Willy Brandt famously knelt before the monument to the ghetto heroes in Warsaw, knowing fully well that war leaves scars that are hard to heal. Unfortunately, with the passage of time, this fact tends to sometimes fade away from collective memory. And taking advantage of those who have never suffered the horrors of war, some malicious voices foment violence, the culture of death, glorifying it as a just cause. They aim to rewrite history, make it their own, and fan the flames of war. A glaring example of how quickly these flames can be fanned is Russia's war on aggression in Ukraine. With a complete disregard for Ukraine's sovereignty, Putin's war has trampled international law, devastated communities, and caused unimaginable suffering, particularly among civilians. What's been happening now in Ukraine for almost 3 years has terrible consequences for present and future generations. It is a conflict that has killed and injured thousands and thousands of civilians, and the numbers keep growing. By completely flouting international law, Putin has chosen to undermine the rules-based multilateral order, an order that was built precisely to prevent the politics of power as the sole measures of what international relations should be based on. This war, therefore, goes against everything we fought for after the Second World War. It reflects the politics of intolerance, of hatred, of division. It reflects the politics of those who preach nationalism as an elixir for today's challenges. So therefore, supporting Ukraine is supporting international law and the future of multilateralism. It is working. It is working for the world of tomorrow, as Eleanor Roosevelt rightly put it. But working for tomorrow also means thinking about how can we avoid such wars in the future? And how can we avoid situations where we are once again forced to increase defense spending instead of spending on development? Today, perhaps more than ever, it is important to remember the collective efforts we have made in the past to achieve that goal. I am reminded of the Helsinki Accords from 1975, a document that set the course for the basic elements of peace we know in Europe today. This discussion was difficult then, as it is now, yet it remains crucial to keep these ideas alive. We must seek new forms, new forums, to rekindle the spirit of Helsinki Accords and forge a fresh, dynamic path forward. Because it is vital for the future of international relations and peaceful coexistence to reaffirm the respect for human rights, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and above all, to refrain from the use of threat or force. Diplomacy, Cooperation and good faith must once again become the modus operandi between nations. If my neighbor feels safe, I feel safe. This simple principle forms the backbone of genuine peace. When nations ensure the safety of their neighbors, they create a foundation of trust and cooperation that benefits all. But today, that foundation is under threat. Nowhere is this more evident than in the looming specter of nuclear weapons. Nuclear conflict offers no real security. It assures mutual destruction. It leads to a path that inevitably ends in devastation. As proposed in a joint statement by the P5 leaders in 2022, and echoing actually the words of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, and I quote, "A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought." End of quote. That is why we must move beyond the madness of mutual assured destruction and instead embrace the vision of mutual assured development. And the time has now come to push for a no first use guarantee. In the future, let us invest more in shared prosperity than in armaments. I know that we live in times when this approach, Willy Brandt's approach, is more difficult to implement. Yet it is precisely in times like these that we must remain steadfast. Pursuing peace is never easy, but it is always, always necessary. Tomorrow's world also needs strong international institutions and better ways of working together. This has never been truer than in the face of the appalling violence currently unfolding in the Middle East. For decades, violence and instability has plagued this region, tearing families apart, affecting generations, and sowing the seeds of fear in communities. That is why I firmly believe that simple calls for appeasement are no longer enough. This is a humanitarian crisis that demands unwavering international action. The path to peace in the Middle East lies not in fragmented efforts, but in the strength of genuine international cooperation. It is in our shared commitment to dialogue, international law, and the protection of human dignity that we can chart a course towards peace and security. But multilateral efforts must go beyond talk. They must encompass a genuine resolve to address root causes and set a sustainable end goal for peace. Today, it's necessary to have the courage to take the first steps, starting with the release of all hostages, an immediate ceasefire in the region, end the occupation and settlements, reduce the power and influence of terrorist organizations like Hamas, and increase the political role of Palestinian Authority and Fatah. The current Israeli government, I'm afraid, is not working towards a deal that would bring back hostages and end the war. This must be the priority which will allow for a ceasefire and pave the way for a sustainable solution. Then we need to continue to insist on an equitable two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. I often hear that a two-state solution is difficult and unimaginable. But isn't the current status quo more harmful to coexistence, peace, and human life? And the one-state solution is even more unimaginable. A two-state solution is the only true way that respects the rights and responsibilities of both peoples, and it is a prerequisite for peace. It is our duty to build those bridges that will enable progress and ensure the security of Israelis and Palestinians. Efforts now must encompass an outcome where every child in this region wakes to the possibility of a future untarnished by violence. More than ever, dear friends, coexistence should not only be seen as something that is simply possible. It should be regarded as something that is existentially necessary. Dear friends, as I've tried to explain the spirit of common responsibility and common solutions, no matter how difficult they are to achieve, need to inspire our political reactions to the dangerous crisis of our time. At the same time, working for structural success of these ideas and for an international order that is based on multilateralism and international law is key to human progress. The role of the international community and global institutions is therefore essential as we move forward. If we think about it, the United Nations and the European Union and all relevant international and regional organizations must act not only as mediators between nation states, but even more as active promoters of common solutions for peace and progress. In a world of interconnected crisis, we need solutions that transcend borders, and for that, multilateralism must work better and faster. I believe that the United Nations must evolve to meet today's demands and challenges, starting with putting Global South and Global North on equal footing, to finally work towards one world approach as set out by Brandt, Palme, Kreisky, and others. The Pact for the Future, recently adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, should be our guiding compass. It is not complete, but I believe it is a truly important initiative. It encourages us to rethink multilateralism and to work together to improve it. We're not there yet. There's still a lot to do. So now it's important that we continue this process. We need a more inclusive and democratic structure where all voices are heard and also respected. In this way, we will be more effective in supporting peacekeeping missions, taking decisive action on climate change, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Willy Brandt dedicated his life to peaceful coexistence. He strove to make this a reality in Germany, in Europe, and the world. The challenges before us now are enormous. The times for small steps is over. In the words of another Nobel Peace Prize laureate and peace activist, Leymah Gbowee, and I quote, "You can never leave footprints that last if we're always walking on tiptoe," end of quote. That is why we must be daring, like Brandt was. We have to reform and strengthen the institutions that were created to protect humanity and save succeeding generations from the scourge of wars, as the United Nations Charter puts it. In this regard, the UN's Summit for the Future was a remarkable breath of vision from the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. And as co-chair of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism, I'm proud to have somewhat contributed to this important exercise with a report that sets out ways to restore confidence in multilateralism. Because I am convinced that through committed multilateral action, we can build a safer world and protect future generations. The future we aspire to will take work, commitment, and hope. But as Robert F. Kennedy once said, and I quote, "The future is not a gift, it's an achievement. Every generation helps make its own future. This is the essential challenge of the present." End of quote. So it is not too late to make positive change. Friends, in addition to the multilateral crisis, we're also experiencing a democratic crisis. And here too, I believe we have much to learn from Willy Brandt. All over the world, democracies have been built by the hands of the people, many of them putting their life on the line. Citizens know that only through democracy can they be respected and equal. Citizens fought for it because they knew that democracy is a system where power belongs to the people. It is not a stage for a strongman to dominate, but it's a shared foundation where no one stands above the rest. A principle where the division of power is not seen as a weakness, but as a guarantee that no individual can override the rights of the people. True democracy is the promise that every voice counts, every institution remains free, and every person has a stake in shaping their future. Only through democracy can citizens be truly free. But democracy, no matter how firm and established, is never safe from those who see it as an affront to reaching power. There are three key features of the far right's approach that pose a fundamental threat to democracy. That is hate, division, and populism. Hate is their first weapon. It dehumanizes and targets people on the basis of their background, religion, or identity. It serves as a deliberate distraction, scapegoating the vulnerable to divert attention from real problems. Hatred pits neighbor against neighbor, ensuring that collective anger never touches those in power. Then division. Division erodes trust and breeds hatred. It undermines peaceful coexistence and dialogue. And finally, populism. This is the vector through which hatred and division are channeled into the society. The far right uses it to package and fuel its destructive agenda, offering dangerously simplistic answers to complex problems. Populism replaces meaningful dialogue with empty slogans and promises. It creates false enemies and shuns nuance, favoring manipulation over truth. When these three elements, hate, division, populism, become political weapons, society and democracy are under threat. Unfortunately, the pages of our history are already stained by such developments. Willy Brandt saw this with his own eyes, how dangerous the combination of these three elements is. This is a story you know only too well. Faced with imminent arrest by the Nazi regime, Willy Brandt, only 20 years old at the time, had to leave Germany and seek refuge in Norway. And there he championed the cause of a united Europe. The far-sightedness of this young Willy Brandt, who was aware of the need of establishing a European peace order based on a common European project, is actually striking. And the fact that the United Nations and the European Union are projects born out of the scars of war to ensure that it never happens again shows the scale of the problem. Today it is more important than ever to reread these chapters of our history, if only to remind ourselves of the dangers of the rise of the far right, to remind ourselves that democracy is worth fighting for. But we need to do more than review history. We need to do more than treat the symptoms once the disease is established. We must also address the root causes of the rise of the far right. Because, friends, when it comes to politics, I believe it should always start and end with citizens' concerns. And since the turn of the century, we have witnessed important moments in progress, but we have experienced major challenges that have left deep scars, from the financial crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic. Such events can fuel discontent, affecting some citizens more than others. But popular discontent doesn't happen by accident. Citizens do not suddenly become receptive to extremism for no reason. Discontent occurs when citizens begin to lose hope that their lives will improve. It happens when despair prevails. It is also shaped by political decisions that can bring either progress or neglect. And it doesn't take long for demagogues to exploit this despair and economic fractures and attempt to capitalize on it. As a social democrat, I believe that social cohesion is inherently linked to social justice, that it depends on our fight against poverty and inequality, that it depends on restoring dignity to people's lives. When Willy Brandt famously said that Germany should dare more democracy, he backed up his governance with comprehensive domestic reforms. Reforms to increase and extend social services, to extend civil liberties, and improve access to education, and with that, opportunities for all. Democracy is not a spectator sport, as Marian Wright Edelman once said. It is built from the ground up. It is based on positive political action. It requires involvement from both the citizens and decision makers together. It requires people to believe that democracy works for them. But for the democracy to thrive, one must focus on more than just the material dimension. We have to create the very same environment that allowed democracy to exist in the first place. And the key element here is truth. The Enlightenment, many years ago, this movement brought into society elements that are relevant still today, namely secular thinking, and it transformed our view of individual rights, freedom, and equality. It brought fact-based analysis into the public space, and with all these elements, it ultimately brought democracy. So therefore, the conclusion is that democracy is a system that flourishes in truth. A system that is based on the simple fact that everything can be resolved through debate and exchange, not violence. Without this key element, democracy risks losing its relevance. That is why fake news, disinformation, and the creation of alternative realities are such powerful weapons for despots. That is why politicians like Vladimir Putin invest heavily in disinformation wars against full-fledged democracies. So truth is an essential pillar of democracy, but it's also a vulnerability, because to damage this element is to damage democracy itself. Therefore, we need to rebuild trust and fortify it, to foster a society where decisions and public debate are based on sound, factual arguments. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas once spoke about the unforced force of the better argument. Although this is, of course, an ideal that is hard to achieve in reality, we must make an effort to reflect it as much as possible in our thoughts and in our actions, both as individuals and as political representatives. By actively promoting informed, reasoned discourse, we can strengthen democracy. Furthermore, in recent decades, humanity has accumulated more knowledge than ever before. Never before have we been so interconnected. Never before has information been so accessible. Never before have we traveled so much. And yet there is a tendency for people to limit their knowledge in order to confirm and reinforce only their own perspectives. Instead of understanding each other, our different struggles and realities, many choose to misunderstand and belittle others. That is why defending and creating a space in society for a culture of truth, understanding, and respect is key. And as political decision makers, we need to lead by example. Willy Brandt always had such a political standpoint, a positive approach to politics, based on respect, facts, arguments. We have to follow his model. This is a question of existential importance for the very survival of democracy. And speaking of survival, I would like to mention a final key crisis that I think everyone here agrees needs to be addressed, the climate crisis. If there's anything that requires collective action, this is it. Because the undeniable truth is this: environmental sustainability and human survival are inextricably connected and linked. And who? And who, if not us, the most industrialized and historically polluting nations, should shoulder the heaviest responsibility in reversing this trajectory? The EU, together with all the world's industrialized nations, has a unique responsibility to make a difference and lead the fight against climate change. First, because a political entity that brings together member states, we are capable to make collective policy decisions. Second, because as an industrial power, we have historically contributed to current global emissions. And third, because of the importance of our economy, we have the potential to be the standard bearers. But above all, we have to do this transition as a win-win opportunity to build a sustainable and prosperous society. These two goes hand in hand. And that's why Europe must not pause for breath. We are already running late in this marathon. We must set a strong example in tackling the environmental crisis, both by accelerating our development of renewable technologies and by inspiring other nations to follow a path of sustainability. CO2 emissions and pollutions must be reduced to zero. With political will, with a spirit of trust between stakeholders, and with full cooperation between North and South, this is possible. We must do this for future generations. Brandt's North-South report warned against the alarming ecological changes, and it underlined that we can no longer accept the idea that the protection of the environment is an obstacle to development. On the contrary, protecting the environment is an essential aspect of development. And saving our planet is a collective effort. The development of the South and the progress of the North are inseparable. Only by working together, harmonizing standards and regulations, can we make real progress. Friends, environmental and social transitions go hand in hand. Climate neutrality must be a force for social progress also. It is unacceptable that the most vulnerable pay the highest price for this climate emergency. That is why supporting workers, farmers, communities is key to bringing everyone on board this transition. Yes, the climate crisis demands swift and transformative action, and we should also see it as an opportunity to create new jobs, to develop new technology that will help us in our daily lives, to make towns and cities more livable, and to develop our wealth. But for this to be successful, we have to prepare for for this new reality. And that means, first and foremost, adapting our social welfare system so that its core purpose to protect the most vulnerable remains intact. Workers, the crucial driving force in our industries, cannot be left behind. They deserve quality and secure jobs in this new economy, an economy that honors their tireless contribution to society. Farmers who put the food on our tables must also be supported with resources and fair pay. Their role is critical for this transition's success. Workers, farmers, and civil organizations should be empowered to become leaders in this change. Yes, friend, climate justice is not only environmental, but also profoundly social. And as a social democrat, I'm truly inspired by Brandt's ideas of respect and solidarity. I'm convinced that this transition is also a testament to our shared values. We can reduce emissions and build better societies. We can support each other and ensure solidarity. We can ensure a transformation that heals our planet and at the same time uplifts every person on it. So, dear friend, this is our moral imperative, a responsibility that belongs to all of us. Climate change is, by definition, incredibly unfair. It hits the most vulnerable the hardest, from island nations now being swallowed by the sea to communities across the global south whose livelihoods are already at the mercy of unpredictable climate. It is often they who bear the heaviest burden, and that is why we have to act. Not just because it is scientifically or economically sound, it is, but also because it is the right thing to do. We cannot ignore the growing scars of climate change within Europe itself, as we have seen recently now in Valencia. Dismissing the urgency of this crisis or pausing our ambitions under the guise of economic pragmatism, as some conservative voices suggest, is not just short-sighted, it is dangerous. It is time to do the right thing and address this crisis head-on. Let us rise to the challenge, dear friends, commit to action and to a vision of a world where the fates of North and South are joined in solidarity. Dear friends, it's an honor of a lifetime to stand here and reflect on the enduring legacy of Willy Brandt. Brandt's vision was ahead of our time. Ahead of his time. He showed us that history is not a sprint, it's a marathon. That bold ideas need time and space to grow, and that the essential task is never to give up in our quest for peace, even in the face of adversity. Today, with emerging global powers shaping the world, Brandt's ideas are more vital than ever. His emphasis on coexistence and peace showed the world that even when tensions are high, even when dialogue is dismissed and as idealistic, the pursuit of peace and common security remains vital. He showed us that despite the low level of trust between nations, it's important for our survival to work together, to never compromise our principles, and to always fight for a better and fairer world. Friends, in these times of division and uncertainty, let us continue to believe in the power of these ideas. Let us, as Michelle Obama wisely put it, go high when others go low. And let us, like Brandt, hold on to the vision that a just and peaceful world is always possible. Now, before I conclude, I would like to say just a few words about the upcoming general elections in Germany, and we have elections around in Europe. I've talked about the dangers of the far right and its rise, so I won't repeat myself. But I am convinced of one thing. Democrats in Germany and in Europe, and of course Social Democrats, aren't just fighting for a government. They are fighting for the very soul of democracy. As traditional right-wing movements rapidly move to the far right in narrative and policy and alliances, it's more important than ever to stand firm in defense of progress and democracy. The crisis that we face today cannot be dealt effectively, if at all, with the far right in charge or a conservative movement hostage to it. This threat is also reflected at European level. The new European Commission must distance itself from regressive movements that threaten the existence. It must defend multilateralism, defend democracy, and speed up the green transition. It must be able to promote real change, adapt to new realities, protect its citizens. And this is only possible if it remains, above all, a project of peace, as it was originally conceived. Now let me now finish by coming back to Willy Brandt. Everything I've said, everything we know about Willy Brandt, his life, his ideas, his political impact, tells us in the end one thing. Even in the darkest and most complicated hours of history, progress is always possible. As he has said it himself, zur Summe meines Lebens gehört im Übrigen, dass es Ausweglosigkeit nicht gibt. Thank you so much.